Once you have entered in all of your payroll details and verified the information on the payroll as it was discussed in our prior video on processing pay run, you are ready to go ahead and print the checks and/or direct deposit advices for your employees. Before we go to that step, let's take and look at the preferences that are needed for printing out checks and payroll advices. To do that, I'm going to go to File and Preferences. That came up on another screen for me, so I'm going to drag it over. We're going to come down here on the left and choose the option for printing, and I'm going to first look at payroll checks. And I'm going to go to the Database tab for that. You're going to select which printer you want those checks to go to. Then you will take and select what style of checks you've ordered from the forms vendor. The option for a stub type determines the amount of details that you're going to see on that stub. So you can select one of the stub types we have out here. And if you want to see what those details look like, you can click on the question mark icon on the bottom corner down here, and it gives examples of the different stub types and the details included on them. If you have pre-printed checks, then you're likely to say no to printing the check number and the company name and address on the check, because they're already printed on there. If you have our Check Designer product and are printing on blank stock checks, you might set that to yes. How do you want to handle the Social Security number of employees on the pay stubs? Do you want to print them? Do you not want to print them? Or do you want to print only the last 4 digits? We've elected to not print them at all. The option to print hours offered is something that's only needed for agricultural employers employing H-2A workers. If you have H-2A workers, you may set this to yes, otherwise you'll leave it set at no. Printing the memo on the check, if you've entered in a memo on the pay run and you want it to print on all of the checks by default, you can select this to be yes. The number of copies, even if this is set to not set, will be 1 for a check, and it'll be 1 for everybody unless you've ordered multi-part checks and you want to print on those multi-part checks. Otherwise, it's likely to be 1 for everybody. Your default pay stub will be in English language unless you have set up a pay stub translation that you want to use instead. So if you're using the English language one, you'll set this to no. If you want to use a pay stub translation that you've created, you can set this to yes, and then select that pay stub translation as the default. Some printers that print you might be printing to don't like large quantities of checks being sent to them at a time. So if you need to break those out into smaller batches, we can choose a smaller batch of checks over here. However, you're probably not going to know that until you send your first batch of checks to the printer and you get an error. So we're going to leave it at not set until then. Under payroll advices, we have very similar options. So you have the check, you have the printer that you're sending them to, the style. However, the advice type is something that you might want to change. Where the checks are being printed on an actual form, lots of times you're printing your pay advices onto plain paper. So you don't need to print out 2 stubs since you don't have a perforation on them anyways. So one example of one that people use a lot for the pay advices is this one called Check Detail. Again, you're going to choose the stub type, which represents the details that you're going to see on the stub, and you can click on the question mark icon for examples. Do you want to print the advice number on that? Well, if this is being printed on plain paper, then you're likely to want to print the advice number and the company name and address. So that's where it's going to differ from the checks. Do you want to print the Social Security number on the stub? Yes, no, or the last 4 digits. If you're an H-2A worker and you need to, if you're an agricultural employer and you have H-2A workers, you're going to want to print the hours offered. Otherwise, you'll set that to no. How many copies of these pay advices do you want? And do you want to print direct deposit amounts on it? Direct deposits can be broken out into multiple bank accounts. And if you say no to this, then it's going to put the direct deposit down as the total amount of the direct deposit. If you say yes, then it'll show how much went into each kind of account. And again, just like with the checks, some printers can't handle large quantities or a large batch of pay advices being sent in at one time. So you can make that be a smaller batch at a time down here if you get an error. I'm going to click Save on that, and we're ready to go ahead and show you how to post and print that pay run. So we're going to return to the payroll screen by going to Processes and Pay Employees. And there's the open pay run we've been working with. So I'm going to click Edit on it. And the tab that hasn't been discussed yet is the Print Checks tab. So we've entered in our pay run. We've verified all of the reports on the Prepayments Reports tab. And now we're ready to print these checks. So on the top left, you get 3 options for printing the checks. And the one that you're going to use most commonly is the one on the top. You're going to print checks and direct deposit advices. Now, if you don't have direct deposit, you'll only get checks. If everybody's direct deposit, then you'll just get direct deposit advices and no checks. The second option is used when you want to override any direct deposit options and print paper checks for all of your employees. Perhaps you're doing a bonus run and you want to actually print out the checks. You can just override those direct deposit settings and print out the checks. The last option is used for pay runs that are being entered in after the fact, usually. So maybe it was entered in another system and you're re-entering it into CenterPoint, or it was a manually written pay run and you're entering it into CenterPoint. What'll happen when you go to post the pay run is it'll bring up a grid of all of the employees, and you can manually enter in what check number or advice number was assigned to that employee in the original pay run. So I'm going to select the top option. Below that is a section for the printing order. So what order do you want these to come out in? I have moved over to the right-hand side, department, last name, and first name. Now I can move these around, like if I want first name before last name, I could highlight it and move it up or down on the list by using those arrow keys. And this is going to represent the order they come out in. However, checks are going to come out first in this order, and then direct deposit advices will come out in this order. So they're not all done at the same time because they go on different kinds of paper. At the bottom, you have an option to process and post and print this together, or you could separate out that processing stage. The processing stage is kind of our error checking stage. So if you want to separate that out from the posting and printing, you can, or you could leave them together and do that at the same time. Now, before I hit post and print, there are 3 check boxes over here to the right. On the top checkbox, if you have any leave that is accrued on each and every pay run and it's marked to calculate on the pay run, you can accrue the leave as you post this pay run by checking that box. Then when you set up your payroll liabilities, you assigned each of those liabilities to a vendor. On the vendor detail, there is a place to put in the terms, the payment terms for any invoices assigned to that vendor. And that payment term will calculate the due date. If you want the system to show you a list of those liabilities and the due dates assigned to them so you can adjust them if you want to, you'll select this middle option to display liabilities. And we'll see that because I've gone ahead and selected that. And then if you happen to have our Publish Pay Advices module, you can choose to publish these pay advices as you're posting this pay run. It can be done in a separate step, and if you don't have that module, then you don't need to worry about this. I'm going to go ahead and click on Post and Print, and the first thing it does is it displays the liabilities. Now, these 2 liabilities up at the top are these 2 vendors. I had assigned a term called End of Month, which set the due date to the end of the month, or actually the 30th of the month. The rest of these I did not assign a term to the vendor, so therefore the due date winds up being the same date of the day that we're posting this pay run. And I can adjust any of these. So I just have to go in and type in the due date that I want them to actually be before we post this. So I can override that. I don't need to, so I'm going to click OK. And then the first thing it's going to come up with is if you have it marked to calculate any leave, it'll allow you to calculate the leave at this point. So I'm going to click Calculate. These are the people that it is going to go ahead and calculate the leave for. If for some reason I need to not calculate it for any one of these people, I can uncheck them. Otherwise, I could click Save and it'll add that to their leave balances. And then it's going to come back and say that it's going to print checks. So it's going to tell me it's going to give me an opportunity to verify the preferences that I set up and change them if I need to. Click OK. It'll ask me to verify what the next check number is. So it'll assign this check number to the first one that it prints, and then it'll keep incrementing after that. I'm going to click Print, and it'll go ahead and print those out. And then it's going to ask me about direct deposit advices. So it's just asking me once again to verify my preferences. And then when I click OK, it's also going to ask me to verify that this is the next advice number that I need to use. And I can click Print on that, and it'll go ahead and print those. If I have a direct deposit file that needs to be created, it's going to create it in this step. Now, it can be created later too. There is a menu option for doing that, but I'm going to create it at the time of this pay run. So I'm going to choose the date that we're transmitting this, and I'm going to say what the transmission time is, and then the effective entry date of this payroll. This is when we set up direct deposit, it asks you to identify where on your computer you want those direct deposit files to go and what you want them to be named. So what's the prefix on it? I made my prefix be called DD, and then it has the year, month, and day of the pay run after that. And then all I have to do is click Create File, and it goes ahead and creates the file, and now that's ready to be uploaded to the bank. And we are done with going ahead and printing and processing our payroll. It does look like it disappeared, but that's just because our filter here is not showing us the processed pay runs. So either we can change to no filter and we would see all of our pay runs, and that's really the easiest way, or we could go over to the filter here and change the status to include posted pay runs. But typically we don't normally look at posted pay runs on the list tab here. So it has been posted. It did not disappear. I'm ready to click close there, and we're done printing and posting our checks.